We need to have a critical mass of youth, from diverse backgrounds, joining politics at the top level of hierarchy in countries or at the European level, and not being tokenized, meaning not being the unique voice that we call when we want to quote a youth or a young woman or a young man or anything in between.
Welcome to the ELIAMEP podcast series. I have the pleasure to host in this podcast Omezzine Khelifa. She was part of the Tunisian revolution in January 2011, and she has since contributed to a democratic transition in Tunisia. She's also participating in the third ELIAMEP ACG Summer Academy, training emerging leaders of the new geopolitical challenges in the Mediterranean. Ms. Khelifa, thank you so much for having this discussion about democracy, about Arab Spring, and of course the Tunisian revolution, which you were a part of, if I may say so.
Thank you for having me.
Well, many times we say in Greece that young people are not interested in politics, in the elections. Is that so, do you believe? Or, as you have said, we do not train them to exercise critical thought and to make them conscious of the importance of their participation in society, and then we criticize them exactly about not doing that we have not trained them to do.
It's an interesting question, because indeed only a minority of youth choose political parties to mobilize for the common good. Most youth of the generation, from what I see in Europe or in Tunisia and other places where there is freedom of speech and critical thinking, there is different kinds of mobilization. So that is not true that they are not involved in politics or don't care about the state of the world. They just don't believe and trust in the existing old institutions, such as political parties, trade unions, any type of civil society organization that has been existing. And so they are just trying new ways, like protests, like online movements. And movements have seen changes, like everything about climate, the Fridays for Future, and activities that are outside of the existing system, but were able to put pressure on governments and to change the conversation and the debates. I think when we speak about youth education and critical thinking and training, I personally think about education in schools. Coming from Tunisia, I was raised in a dictatorship before 2011. I don't think public education has prepared us to be critical and have our own voices and challenge wherever is in front of us and involved in politics. And that did not transform when we had the revolution. Reform takes time. Political leaders who were in power didn't agree on the vision of education. There's a lot of fears about going back in terms of what we are teaching the kids. There was a divide between civic values and Islamic law at the time, different political parties fighting for different society projects. So nobody touched education. The dictatorship basically raised followers. I think in other democracies, there are also issues for in terms of education and how much we need to have young people, and I'm talking again about kids and teenagers, know about the challenges of the 21st century. They are educated to have critical thinking. They are aware of what's happening. Every youth, I think, in the world now, when they have a phone, they are globally, they see what's happening globally. So all of them, even if they are not allowed to have free speech in their country, they can think for themselves. I think the most important thing after education is really to have the space to express this thinking. Before freedom of speech comes, obviously, the freedom of thinking, allowing yourself to think. self-censorship is the biggest problem in dictatorships. So yeah, I'm not sure I answered your question, but
yes, you did, and my next question has to do about democracies, and if democracy is in danger, because even in the European Union, we see the rise of far-right parties. They are gaining again momentum. Populism is on the rise, and do we seem to lose our focus on the freedom so hard gained? We watch what is happening in France, and I think the problem in France is deeper than the actual incident of the death of the young boy by police fire. We see polarized societies, even in the European Union. So do you think that democracy is in danger?
Yes, democracy is in danger, because democracy is not providing any more concrete solutions for the most marginalized. Depending on which country, the most marginalized can have different faces, different backgrounds, different origins, different social classes, and economic classes as well. So let's say that when democracy is not bringing the dividends anymore and has still the challenge of every democracy, which is the balance between security and liberties. And when people start to feel that the state, the government, is not for them anymore, it's the apparatus, which is the security apparatus, is not respecting human rights. Obviously, marginalization with security that's not respecting human rights is the recipe for explosion in any type of society. And I think that the difficulty today is that we see democracy as a game, or at least those who believe in democracy, citizens who have been born under democracy, see it as something that has been achieved and cannot be touched. And it's a basis for societies, but it's never the case. Democracy is a state that can evolve or can go backwards. And I know it for a fact, again, as a French Tunisian, born in a dictatorship, raised there, but also lived in France for 10 years and earned my nationality there. My French nationality makes me have this two views, right? Living under dictatorship, believe that it's going to last forever, having no voice, being afraid of involving in politics because of the consequences of being in jail and exile, or tortured, if we criticize the regime, and living under a democracy where I was also didn't feel that I was part of it, even though I was a French national, newly French national. I still felt that maybe I didn't have the right to have a voice. Maybe I'm not representing the majority of society, and I was not born in France. So all of that made me question my identity and my belonging and my right to express myself in a democracy. So I think more marginalized people have been there for generations of immigrants. In the case of France, even feel worse. They have been, especially in Nanterre and all the neighborhoods where the riots are happening. These are ghetto neighborhoods. So people see the police only to repress them. They feel neglected by the state. So for them, the state is not social anymore. It's not protecting them anymore. It's only them there to repress them, to surveil them. And this is the biggest issue of democracy, because when it starts to behave as a autocracy in some areas and not in other areas. So this perception that democracy applies for some and not for others, because promise of democracy is equality, right? So when there is a promise of equality, but in the facts, there is huge inequality, whether social, economic, or even in security issues. This is the second ingredient to the recipe of explosion, unfortunately.
So do you believe that it's also a religion thing because you were a Muslim, because now the young people that feel that they don't have what they deserve in France and elsewhere is because they are Muslim? And why do young people become radical? And I'm not talking only about religion, but do they become radical because they feel that they do not have a future? Even if in some cases, if they live in democracies, in some cases, if they live in other countries that they have dictatorship, is there a common thing between all that and how young people feel and turn radical?
I think everyone's identity is defined by the space, the society where they live. If you are a Muslim in a majority of Christian society, and if you're attacked from or feel threatened because you are Muslim, of course you will identify more as a Muslim and you will show that more as a Muslim. But if you are, let's say, I don't know, from a different race, for example, you're African American and you live in a society where majority is white, and you feel threatened because you are black, then you will more show your identity as an African American, as a black person. So identity can shift depending on where you live. So I don't think it's a question of identity, of being Muslim or being black or being LGBT or being any type of other minority that we can identify. I think it's a question of feeling of belonging. So do these minorities feel that they belong in their societies? Do they feel that they're equal to the majority that live in the society? Equal treatment, equal education, equal access to public health, to housing, to any promise of a democratic society, right? Again, like the question of what are the values that are promised under democracies and how they are applied in reality for the minorities. And when we think actually about political leadership, because it's at the end of the day, it's really about the policies that are made and how they are implemented under the supervision of and the decisions of political leaders. Today, there is a question in democracies where do they really represent the majority? When you start adding, for example, the different minorities that I was thinking about in terms of race, in terms of origin, in terms of social class, in terms of gender, you realize that they become the majority, right? Adding them together, the majority is not represented in terms of political leadership. So, of course, there is a difference between what people, and especially the most marginalized and feel excluded, want and what the political leadership implements and decides. When there is this gap, the bigger the gap, the less trust there is, and the more issues can happen, and violence can spark. But I mean, the promise, one of the other promises of democracy is that you can peacefully protest, and that it has an effect, that you can vote, and it has an effect. But it seems that this is not happening anymore, and so that's also very problematic, and the challenge of the political leadership.
So you have fought many years for democracy in Tunisia, and do you believe that it is a myth that Arab countries, or to speak more generally, Muslim countries cannot have liberal democracies? Because there seems to be that kind of myth that the West, European Union, United States, they are trying to enforce a political system that maybe does not belong in this part of the world.
I don't know why the two questions about Muslim identity, actually, I don't really see any relation between the freedom of or the right of someone to choose their religion and their will and or need and need to have a dignified life. I think when we think about human beings before any type of communitarism, whether it's because of their race or origin or again religion, we see that everyone on this planet wants to have a peaceful, dignified life, have a roof over their head, money in their pocket, food on their table, access to health, access to public transportation, and etc. So these demands that were also the demands of Tunisian people in the protests of the Tunisian Revolution that we call the Revolution of Freedom and Dignity, were jobs, freedom, and dignity, indeed. So when you think about jobs, it's about economic prosperity. When you talk about freedom, it's political freedom, and it's personal freedoms as well, and dignity on top of everything else, which is the basis for any human being to be happy at the end of the day, and to feel that they are belonging to a society that's not oppressing them or excluding them for any type of reason. So no, it's not related to religion. It's about human beings who want to be free. And in 2011, it was the first time of our history in the region, in Tunisia and in the region, that we were able to express ourselves. In the case of Tunisia, we were for 23 years under Ben Ali dictatorship. Then before that, we were about 30 years under Bourguiba president, who was the father of Tunisians, independent and modern Tunisia, but also an autocrat. And before that, we were colonized by the French, and before that, we were in the Ottoman Empire. So this means that for generations, everyone in Tunisia didn't feel as a citizen. They were subjects. They were told what to do. What was decided, like their daily life was decided elsewhere by someone else who did not have maybe their best interest at heart. So 2011 was really about getting out of the system, saying enough is enough. And even if it's going to be messy, we want our rights to have jobs and freedom and dignity.
What do you believe are the biggest challenges for young people today? They seem to have a lot, that they seem to live in prosperous societies, but they find themselves more times at a loss. What do you think are the biggest challenges for them in the future?
So if we talk about youth in prosperous societies, which is different youth from societies that are poor.
Yes, of course.
Youth in prosperous society, I don't think we can also identify them as a homogeneous group. There are students and people who are not in training, people who are not in any kind of education, people who are unemployed, and people who are already working, youth who are already working. So it's really different kinds. And we have women youth, men youth, youth who live in rural areas, cities. You understand where I'm going. Basically, it's difficult to have a youth policy or think about the need for youth to have a common vision. Because I think everyone's experience, and youth in particular, that they have still a short lived experience. They want the best for themselves, but the more and more in prosperous society, and that's given me a lot of hope, is they have a vision, a new vision for the world, a new vision for a more globalized world, a vision for a world that that preserves the planet. Where people are taken into consideration, where they are not from the outside of the system screaming that we're basically deciding for them for the future, but want to be and pushing to be part of the conversation and to shift the conversation. So I think the most important for me today is to see in more youth leaders embracing politics, more political parties who are opening their doors wide open for diversified voices from youth. They have a new vision. If I think only about North Africa and the Middle East, 55% of the population of the demographic are youth. Not all countries are prosperous in the region, or far from that, actually. But still, the leadership is the same. It's not listening to youth. There are no democratic ways to have them involved. At least in prosperous countries, they have means. And I today, even if we like it or not, political leaders decide for the fate of youth. So we need to have a critical mass of youth, from diverse background, joining politics at the top level of hierarchy in countries or at the European level, and not being tokenized, meaning not being the unique voice that we call when we want to quote a youth or a young woman or a young man or anything in between, when we want to look good, but actually have them really be the voice of the cause that they are defending and really respected and taken into consideration and have the power to shift the conversation. That's my hope for youth.
Well, now I want us to take you in another topic, which has to do about terrorist attacks, about attacks on our safety. And have you seen a change in that? I mean, there were massive attacks from Islamist organizations, from jihadists, and now we see more and more that the attacks are coming from lone actors. Do you have an explanation for that? Has that to do also with our democracies and how they work, that people that come from us are the ones that are becoming terrorists, and not in the way that we were used to after 9/11?
I would like to ask you about the context of and the time that you're referring to.
Well, we saw what happened in this park in France with the man from Syria and the knife that he knifed. And so I'm trying to think if all this has something to do with the changes in our societies also. And there was this war that began with Al-Qaeda, but maybe all this has changed now. It's under a completely different context.
Yeah, I don't know the case you're referring to, but what I can say about at least the Tunisian context is that the revolution that had so many promises did not fulfill these promises. So peaceful protests basically have shown that they don't translate into a change of life and a better living. So a minority, and only a minority of people and youth can see or start to see violence as a way to change things and to attack the system that is not answering their needs and respecting them and including them. So for me, anyone who feels marginalized and disrespected and with no ways of getting their rights from the system can be easily indoctrinated, can be easily used by any terrorist organization or crime organization or any type of organization that has a political objective of destroying the system in place. So depending on the context, it could be a terrorist attack in Paris, or it can be a gang attack in one of the neighborhoods in the US. It can be also white supremacist. If I take the example of the US, for decades now, if we take the figures, white supremacists have been the biggest threat to American society and stability. But despite this fact, we only hear about terrorist jihadist attacks, which are a real threat. but in terms of numbers, they started more recently, and they were attacks that have not been like done by a movement of people who have been there and have the clear objective to wipe out diversity from society. So I think every context is difficult. If we think about threats to security, every context is also different from the type of marginalization or issues that they have with people who feel excluded. I don't think that security is a solution. For years and decades, we have used military solutions, surveillance, police to follow potential terrorists, which is good to stop terrorist attack, which is important to stop crime organizations or terrorist groups, but does not prevent violent extremism. So for me, it goes back again to the promise of democracies to include the most marginalized, to have equality in treatment, equality in freedoms and rights. And then when we don't have this feeling of belonging, feeling of inclusion, and feeling of equal rights, then there is a breach for anyone to use these marginalized voices to any type of purpose to destroy or attack the system in place.
Well, you mentioned, and that is my last question to you, you mentioned it in the beginning, you mentioned social media as the new way of communicating, of being involved in politics. Do you find their role beneficiary for democracy, or as all things, it has its good size and its bad size, and you have to be careful how to use it?
I'm not sure it's new. It started in 2011 in Tunisia, where we used Facebook to share the videos of the police violence and killings. So the 12 years, young generations have been born with this use of social networks. So for them, it has always been the case that this is a way to mobilize, to share videos, text, images, and anything about political opinions or opinions in general. It's a tool. At the end of the day, you can use it the way you want. The issues is that it's not neutral the way we use it, especially with all the money that is being put in place for misinformation, disinformation, fake news, and propaganda. The danger lies here when we don't have mechanisms of protection that reach everyone, protect everyone from these type of intrusions, let's say, that can really shake someone's beliefs, despite the fact that they have different realities and they have trusted media, etc. What reaches them through the social media becomes more of a reality to them than what they hear everywhere else. So social media is very important because this is how youth communicate, but it's a huge place for threats to the type of information that is exchanged. If we don't put the regulation, if the platforms themselves that are not public but they are private are making sure that we have fact checking, that there are no companies using the data to influence elections. And this is such a challenge. This is such a challenge today because we're not there yet. And democracies are being undermined by the use of social media to influence elections.
Mrs. Khelifa, thank you so much for this discussion. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Odin. Thank you so much for this conversation. It was good to have it with you.
This was another ELIAMEP podcast with Odin Linardatou. Recording, editing, and sound editing by Petros Karpathiou. Follow us on the ELIAMEP channels on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and elsewhere.